This video is going to talk about exponential graphs. Now, hopefully you have looked at this website that we have over here to the left-hand side, and you've played around with what happens with A and B. And we're going to take a look at when A is greater than 0 and B is greater than 1. So let's move the A, and you can see that as A increases, if you look closely, it's moving up and down the y-axis as we increase or decrease that A. If we move the B, as it gets greater than 1, and it continues to increase and get steeper, and as we make our B get smaller again, still greater than 1, it's going to be getting flatter. But the graph, when B is greater than 1 and A is greater than 0, is, first of all, it's going to be increasing. If you look over at the graph, as x gets larger, y is also getting larger, so it's an increasing graph. The other thing that we notice about this graph is that it is always above the x-axis. So we can say that if A is greater than 0 and B is greater than 1, our graph will be above the x-axis. So what happens if A is less than 0, but we're still looking at B greater than 1? So let's make those A's less than 0. And now you can see that our graph is again moving up and down the y-axis, but now it looks like it's going to be decreasing. So it's a decreasing graph. If B is greater than 1, A less than 0, we'll have a decreasing graph, and it's going to be below the x-axis. And that's because of the A being less than 0. Now if we look at our other case where we have B is between 0 and 1, and A is greater than 0, going back and looking at our graphic, now we can see that as we move A, it moves up and down the y-axis again, and that we can also see that the graph is decreasing as x gets larger. Then y is going to be decreasing, and these graphs was above the x-axis. Okay, so if A is less than 0 and B is between 0 and 1, we can see that this graph is increasing, and we can also see that it was below the x-axis. And remember, that's because, again, the A is less than 0. So let's see if we can make some generalizations about all of these graphs so that we would be able to graph an equation if they gave us one. So in general, we could say that if A is greater than 0, B is greater than 1, then we could say that our graph would be an increasing graph. And if B is between 0 and 1, then we would say our graph is decreasing. Now the B tells us increasing or decreasing. The A also tells us a couple of things. One thing it tells us is which side of the x-axis is this graph going to be on. If it's greater than 0, we know that it's going to be above the x-axis. But the other thing that A tells us that's a little bit harder to see in the graphic that we were looking at, it tells us what the y-intercept is. It will always be the y-intercept. So in general, we know that we have increasing and decreasing graphs, but if A is less than 0, we actually could just say what we know, everything is going to be the opposite of what we said. So if B is greater than 1, instead of being increasing, it'll be a decreasing. If B is between 0 and 1 and A is less than 0, then instead of being decreasing, it's going to become an increasing graph. So everything is the opposite. So again, in general, we can just remember that B greater than 1 is increasing, B between 0 and 1 is decreasing. And if A is less than 0, then everything will be the opposite of what we think. That way you only have to remember one rule.